So text 109, I will read it, and it doesn't have a purport, so we'll actually recite text 110. Gaunavrite yeba bhashya karila acharya tahara shravane nasha haya sarvakarya. Translation. Shripad Shankaracharya has described all the Vedic literatures in terms of indirect meanings. One who hears such explanations is ruined. Text 110, so this is the one. Please recite after me. Tanhara nahika dosha ishvara gnapana Gaunartha karila mukhya artha achadiya. Tanhara nahika dosha ishvara gnapana Gaunartha karila mukhya artha achadiya. Tanhara of Sri Shankaracharya. Nahika, there is none. Dosha, fault. Ishvaraha, the Supreme Lord. Agna, order. Pana, receiving. Gaunartha, indirect meaning. Karila, make. Mukhya, direct. Artha, meaning. Achadiya, covering. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki. Shankaracharya is not at fault, for he has thus covered the real purpose of the Vedas under the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Please repeat. Shankaracharya is not at fault, for he has thus covered the real purpose of the Vedas under the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Purport. So, it's a long purport. And it's very interesting. The Vedic literature is to be considered a source of real knowledge. But if one does not take it as it is, one will be misled. For example, Bhagavad Gita is an important Vedic literature which has been taught for many years. But because it was commented upon by unscrupulous rascals, people derived no benefit from it, and no one came to the conclusion of Krishna consciousness. Since the purpose of Bhagavad Gita is now being presented as it is, however, within 4 or 5 short years, thousands of people all over the world have become Krishna conscious. That is the difference between direct and indirect explanations of Vedic literature. Therefore, Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu said, Mukhya vrite se artha parma mahatva. To instruct Vedic literature according to its direct meaning, without false commentary, is glorious. Unfortunately, Sri Shankaracharya, by the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, compromised between atheism and theism in order to cheat the atheists and bring them to theism. And to do so, he gave up the direct method of Vedic knowledge and tried to present a meaning which is indirect. It is with this purpose that he wrote his Shariraka Bhasya commentary on the Vedanta Sutra. One should not, therefore, attribute very much importance to the Shariraka Bhasya. In order to understand Vedanta philosophy, one must study the Srimad Bhagavatam, which begins with the words Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Janmadi Asya Yato Navad Itaratas Charte Shabhigna Swarat. I offer my obeisances unto Lord Sri Krishna, son of Vasudeva, who is the supreme, all-pervading personality of Godhead. I meditate upon him, the transcendent reality, who is the primeval cause of all causes and from whom all manifested universes arise, in whom they dwell and by whom they are destroyed. I meditate upon that eternally effulgent Lord, who is directly and indirectly conscious of all manifestations and yet is fully independent. Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 1, Text 1. Srimad Bhagavatam is the real commentary on the Vedanta Sutra. Unfortunately, if one is attracted to Sri Shankaracharya's commentary, Shariraka Bhasya, his spiritual life is doomed. So I thought I will actually say a few points as we go, because too much reading can be rather monotonous as well. So just a few important points to discuss from this first couple of paragraphs that I've read so far is that the first paragraph is Prabhupada saying that the Bhagavad Gita as it is, which is the one that he translated, has been very effective in bringing souls to the conclusion of Krishna consciousness. Whereas prior to that, there were so many commentaries and translations on the Bhagavad Gita and none of them were as effective. And Prabhupada is very clearly saying that this is the difference between a literal, direct commentary, which is not skewed, which is not covered up by somebody's misconceptions. So by a direct commentary like this, it is effective because the words of the Lord are being directly transmitted through a transparent via medium who doesn't have a hidden agenda. Whereas mostly people have agendas of fame and distinction and all of those things. So direct is being said to be very effective. And the other point to discuss here is that Sri Shankaracharya, who is none other than an incarnation of Lord Shiva, so it is said that the word unfortunately is used. Unfortunately, he compromised between atheism and theism. But if we look at it, it's not actually unfortunate, it's very fortunate because he is acting directly on the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And as we know, to follow the order of the Supreme Lord is dharma, is bhakti. So he is acting because he came with a specific role. And by doing this, which is giving the indirect explanation from the Vedas and preaching impersonalism, he managed to create a bridge between atheism and theism. So the bridge is the impersonalism. So as we go on, I'll explain like the sort of evolution of how it came to this point. But basically he was acting directly in under the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead to come and preach this philosophy. Yes, and then the first famous verse of the Srimad Bhagavatam is being highlighted here, that this is the Srimad Bhagavatam is the real commentary on the Vedanta Sutra, right? Not the commentary that, not the Shariraka Bhasya, which is what Shankaracharya preached. So he also gave the commentary on the Vedanta Sutra, but his commentary is the impersonalist commentary, and we are being told right at the end of this long purport, like there's something that's going to make us all shudder and shake with fear. So that is not what we are meant to be reading. We are meant to be reading the Srimad Bhagavatam and listening to the Srimad Bhagavatam. So, which is the real commentary on the Vedanta Sutra. So I'll continue to read. Unfortunately, if one is attracted to Sri Shankaracharya's commentary, Shariraka Bhasya, his spiritual life is doomed. One may argue that since Shankaracharya is an incarnation of Lord Shiva, how is it that he cheated people in this way? The answer is that he did so on the order of his master, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is confirmed in the Padma Purana in the words of Lord Shiva himself. Mayavadam asat chastram prachanam bhaudam uchyate mayaiva kalpitam devi kalo brahmana rupina brahmanas chaparam rupam nirgunam vakshyate maya sarvasam jagatopi asya mohanartham kalo yuge vedante tu mahashastre mayavadam avaidikam Maiva Vakshate Devi Jagatam Nasha Karanat. The Mayavad philosophy, Lord Shiva, so Lord Shiva is talking to his wife Parvati, and these are the verses that he has said to her, and this is the translation of those verses. The Mayavad philosophy, Lord Shiva informed his wife Parvati, is impious, asat chastra. It is covered Buddhism. My dear Parvati, in the form of a Brahmana in Kali Yuga, I teach this imagined Mayavada philosophy in order to cheat the atheists. I describe the Supreme Personality of Godhead to be without form and without qualities. Similarly, in explaining Vedanta, I describe the same Mayavad philosophy in order to mislead the entire population toward atheism by denying the personal form of the Lord. In the Shiva Purana, the Supreme Personality of Godhead told Lord Shiva, Dvaparado yuge bhutva kalaya manu sadishu Svagmai kalpitais tvam cha janan mat vimukhan kuru. In Kali Yuga, so this is Lord Krishna telling Lord Shiva, and Lord Krishna is saying to Lord Shiva, in Kali Yuga, mislead the people in general by propounding imaginary meanings for the Vedas to bewilder them. These are the descriptions of the Puranas. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur comments that Mukhyavriti, the direct meaning, is Abhidavriti, or the meaning which one can understand immediately from the statements of dictionaries, whereas Gaunavriti, the indirect meaning, is a meaning that one imagines without consulting the dictionary. For example, one politician has said that Kurukshetra refers to the body, but in the dictionary there is no such definition. Therefore, this imaginary meaning is Gaunavriti, whereas the direct meaning found in the dictionary is Mukhyavriti or Abhidavriti. This is the distinction between the two. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu recommends that one understand the Vedic literature in terms of Abhidavriti, and the Gaunavriti he rejects. Sometimes, however, as a matter of necessity, the Vedic literature is described in terms of the Lakshanavriti or Gaunavriti, but one should not accept such explanations as permanent truths. So, I'll discuss a few points from here before we move on. Again, the point is being made that what Lord Shiva, as Shankaracharya came and taught, was directly under the order of Krishna. And it wasn't that he was acting on his own and trying to cheat people. It was directly under the order of Krishna. And Krishna said to him that mislead people in general by spreading these imaginary meanings from the Vedas to bewilder them. And and I'll explain right at the end why this happened like this. But the other point that that is being put before us here is these Sanskrit words Mukhyavriti and Gaunavriti, And simply put, Mukhyavriti basically means the direct or literal meaning, which even a simple person could understand because that's how it is defined. Like if you look at the word in the dictionary, the literal meaning of it is being given, and that's what is said to be Mukhyavriti. And Gaunavriti is the indirect meaning, which is what somebody thinks it might mean, not the real meaning, but what somebody is thinking. Or, just like the example being given is somebody thinks Kurukshetra refers to the physical body, whereas we know that Kurukshetra actually refers to the place of pilgrimage where the war was fought. And so it's not, so we are meant, Lord Chaitanya says very, very clearly that we are meant to be accepting the literal or the direct meaning and not the imaginary meanings. So, yes, okay. Now the next paragraph, I will go back to reading, is actually one more thing to say here is that according to Lakshanavriti or Gaunavriti, so what Lakshanavriti, like the time, place and circumstance, that something might be said in that way, but it is not tattva, it is not the absolute. So that it shouldn't be accepted as a permanent truth, but as an indirect explanation. The purpose of the discussions in the Upanishads and the Vedanta Sutra is to philosophically establish the personal feature of the absolute truth. The impersonalists, however, in order to establish their philosophy, accept these discussions in terms of Lakshanavriti or indirect meanings. Thus, instead of being Tattvavada or in search of the absolute truth, they become Mayavada or illusioned by the material energy. When Sri Vishnu Swami, one of the four acharyas of the Vaishnava cult, presented his thesis on the subject matter of Shuddha Advaita Vada, immediately the Mayavadis took advantage of this philosophy and tried to establish their Advaita Vada or Kevala Advaita Vada. To defeat this Kevala Advaita Vada, Sri Ramanujacharya presented his philosophy as Vishishta Advaita Vada, and Sri Madhvacharya presented his philosophy of Tattva Vada, both of which are stumbling blocks to the Mayavadis because they defeat their philosophy in scrupulous detail. Students of Vedic philosophy know very well how strongly Sri Ramanujacharya's Vishishta Vada and Sri Madhvacharya's Tattva Vada contest the impersonal Mayavad philosophy. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, however, accepted the direct meaning of the Vedanta philosophy and thus defeated the Mayavada philosophy immediately. He opined in this connection that anyone who follows the principles of the Shariraka Bhashya is doomed. This is confirmed in the Padma Purana, where Lord Shiva tells Parvati, Shrinu Devi Pravakshyami Tamasyani Yathakraman Yesham Shravana Matrena Patitam Jnaninam Api Apartham Shruti Vakhyanam Darshaya Loka Garhitam Karma Swarupa Tyajyatvam Atra Cha Pradipadyate Sarva Karma Parishbramshan Naishkarmam Tatra Chocyate Paratma Jivayor Akhyam Mayatra Pratipadyate. My dear wife, hear my explanations of how I have spread ignorance through Mayavad philosophy. Simply by hearing it, even an advanced scholar will fall down. In this philosophy, which is certainly very inauspicious for people in general, I have misrepresented the real meaning of the Vedas and recommended that one give up all activities in order to achieve freedom from karma. In this Mayavad philosophy, I have described the Jivatma and Paramatma to be one and the same. How the Mayavada philosophy was condemned by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his followers is described in the Sri Caitanya Caritamrita, Adi-lila, 2nd chapter, verses 94 through 99, where Swarup Damodar Goswami says that anyone who is eager to understand the Mayavad philosophy must be considered insane. This especially applies to a Vaishnava who reads the Shariraka Bhashya and considers himself to be one with God. The Mayavadi philosophers have presented their arguments in such attractive, flowery language that hearing Mayavad philosophy may sometimes change the mind of even a Mahabhagavata or very advanced devotee. An actual Vaishnava cannot tolerate any philosophy that claims God and the living being to be one and the same. So that is the end of this purport. And again, I will just discuss a few points briefly and then move on to the points that I've listed for discussion. So it is told to us really clearly that anyone who follows the principles of the book called the Shariraka Bhasya, which is the book that Lord Shiva wrote, that Shankaracharya wrote to preach Mayavad philosophy, that anyone who follows the principles of this book is doomed. And he is then explaining, Lord Shiva is then explaining to his dear wife Parvati, and he is explaining to her that here are my explanations of how I have spread ignorance throughout this through preaching this philosophy. And this is the part that I said will make us shiver and shake, well, at least some of us, at least me. It is that even an advanced scholar will fall down. Not just an advanced scholar though, because a scholar is not necessarily a Vaishnava, but it is then also said that even a very advanced devotee or even a Mahabhagavata can have a change of mind by hearing this philosophy, the Mayavad philosophy, because it is presented in such an attractive way, using all this flowery and flowy and easy listening sort of musical language. So even somebody who is a Mahabhagavata could have a change of mind reading or hearing this Mayavad philosophy. However, an actual devotee, so this is like a test of who is a true devotee, and seeing it through the eyes of the scriptures, is an actual Vaishnava cannot tolerate any claims of impersonal philosophy that God and the Jiva soul are one and the same. So, so we'll talk about a few things in general coming from this translation and purport. And so early on in this chapter, so we are at 109 and 110 today. So in text 39, and even prior to that, it's being described that Lord Chaitanya, he took sannyas, and then after that he was able to preach very effectively, and he convinced all classes of men, like all different classes of men, to accept the Vaishnava philosophy, except for the Mayavadis. He wasn't able to convince them because they were avoiding him. They were avoiding all his techniques. So, and then now it is what's happening right now is that it is being described gradually how Lord Chaitanya was then able to convince the Mayavadis. Just to refresh our memories of who are Mayavadis, who are impersonalists, it can be a little bit tricky to understand, but sometimes. But so Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he lists some of the characteristics of who Mayavadis are. I mean, actually, to be fair to us, like in the previous ages, like 500 years ago even, like, they had different camps, and it was easy to recognize because they wore a certain kind of clothes, they were like, sticking with their own group of people. I mean, it's described in this chapter that, all the Mayavadi sannyasis used to live in one place, and Lord Chaitanya would live in another house, and he would never associate with them. So it was quite easy to say, oh, they're the Mayavadis, they're the Vaishnavas, like that. But nowadays it is quite mixed up, and actually it is only the internal sort of patterns of thought that can distinguish who is an impersonalist, who is a personalist. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj, he is saying that this is what Mayavadis are, that they are people who use their senses, and they use their sense perception, and they take it as the all in all. That's what they do. And they understand that there is an absolute truth which is beyond their sense perception, but they say that this absolute truth has no spiritual variety and no spiritual form, and that the spiritual world is simply void. There is no personality of Godhead. They don't have any idea or any conception of the multi-variety activities of all the various pastimes of the Supreme Lord. And their understanding is that materialism, which is material wealth, is the only manifestation of the absolute truth. They say that Bhakti Yoga is Maya, and they say that the soul and the super soul are one and the same. So we can, even just sort of, going through that list, it's pretty, like it's the complete opposite viewpoint of the Vaishnava philosophy, complete opposite. And even by reading them, it's like, oh, you don't really want to go there. But that is what Mayavadis, that is what Mayavadi philosophy is. And this is what Lord Chaitanya says about it. Lord Chaitanya says, and I quote, he says, all Mayavadis are offenders to Lord Krishna. So that is what we need to be thinking and feeling. So how then Lord Chaitanya started, how Lord Chaitanya was successful at converting a lot of the Mayavadis over to the Vaishnava philosophy is quite interesting, is that he wanted to do it. So by his supreme will, an opportunity came about that he was invited to somebody's house, and where all the Mayavadi sannyasis were, and he went there, and he washed his feet, and then he actually sat down in that dirty place. And so one of the sannyasis, the leader of the Mayavadi sannyasis, he came and he said, no, don't sit there, why are you sitting there? And Lord Chaitanya said, oh, I'm like in humility. And in humility he said, oh, I'm actually a lower grade of sannyasi than you. The name of this sannyasi was Prakashananda. So Prakashananda, he took Lord Chaitanya, sat him down in a very nice elevated seat, and then they started discussing. So there was a lot of discussion, and then Lord Chaitanya was asked by these Mayavadi sannyasis, please tell us about the Vedanta philosophy. And then Lord Chaitanya started explaining, and then that's how eventually they all got convinced, the Mayavadi philosophers and sannyasis. So again, this Mayavad philosophy is known as the impersonal philosophy, and it was purposefully spread by Shankaracharya. And one other very interesting thing actually, which I found funny about the Mayavadi system, is that they address each other as Narayan. So they say, you are Narayan, I am Narayan, everyone's Narayan. But when they are asked, how come you don't have 4 arms and how come you can't, show us the 4 arms? Then they say, oh, we are Daridra Narayan. Daridra means poor Narayan. So they just make up this false, imaginary sort of thing. And that word Daridra Narayan, that term actually came about by somebody who didn't even know anything about the Vaishnava philosophy. So it's quite interesting and so tricky that we can be misled so easily. So that's why over and over, like Lord Chaitanya, he directly preached the direct meaning, and before him there was Sri Ramanujacharya and Sri Madhvacharya, and they also gave these books and their schools of thought, which were stumbling blocks for the Mayavadis and which directly refuted their philosophy. So Lord Chaitanya confirms that, and when we say Vedic philosophy or Vedanta Sutra, what we are talking about is everything that Srila Vyasadeva said and wrote. So that is what Vedanta Sutra means. And this includes, Lord Chaitanya confirms that all Vedic scriptures include the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutras, the Shruti, Smriti and Nyaya philosophy books as well. That they all need to be understood according to their original statements, that is by direct meaning. However, if we try to describe in our own way, then in the words written here, it is called a disastrous blunder. Like if we cover up the real meaning using our own imperfect senses and our own imperfect thinking without actually drawing from Guru, Sadhu and Shastra, then it is called a disastrous blunder. So, very clearly Lord Chaitanya is saying just take the direct meaning. And in direct contrast, in absolute opposite direct contrast, Shankaracharya preached the Vedanta Sutra, but gave all indirect meanings. So the same books that I said, the Upanishads, the Vedas, the Brahma Sutras, all of the same books, but he completely misrepresented it by preaching it in an indirect way, and this was under the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now we are being told that if we hear such explanations, we are ruined and we are doomed. So that's the part that we have to be really careful about. And so what I wanted to say is that in the Srimad Bhagavatam, in Canto 3, Lord Kapila Dev, he is talking to his mother Devahuti, and she is a very intelligent lady, as is Parvati. We can see, how much the Vedic scriptures uphold a position of women. Is here Lord Shiva is explaining all these things to Mother Parvati and saying, hear from me, this is what I did, this is why I did it. Obviously if she wasn't able to understand, then he wouldn't bother explaining, but we can see that Lord Shiva is telling his wife Parvati. And also, so in Canto 3, Lord Kapila Dev, he is explaining to his mother Devahuti, who is really intelligent, and she's asking all kinds of questions. And there Lord Kapila says that there are 4 kind of schools of thought, and they are the Voidist school of thought, the impersonal school of thought, the Yogi school of thought, and the Bhakti school of thought. So the Voidist philosophy was taught by Lord Buddha, and this was in the 6th century. And the Voidist philosophy is basically that at the end of one's life there is nothing, that everything finishes. The body finishes, the soul finishes, and there is nothing left. And their ultimate aim is nirvana, which is nothing, that there is nothing there. Then in the 8th century, there was this is Lord Shankaracharya then, he came. So Shankaracharya came and he preached the impersonal philosophy. And he did this, as we've been discussing, to create a bridge between atheism, which is what Lord Buddha had been preaching, and theism, which is what Lord Chaitanya was coming to preach. So to sort of ripen up the maturity of the general population and gradually draw them to be more accepting of the Vaishnava philosophy is why Lord Shankaracharya actually came. So the impersonal philosophy, as we've discussed, Shankaracharya came in the 8th century, and they have the ultimate aim of merging into Brahma Jyoti, or the light that is coming out of the Lord's body, but they don't accept that this is coming out of the Lord's body. They just say the impersonal Brahman effulgence. So that's the ultimate goal. Then we have the theists, which is us on the Bhakti Yoga path. Theists who believe in the personal form of the Lord and the personal characteristics of the Lord, and this was in the 15th century that Lord Chaitanya came, and he started preaching this philosophy in a very attractive way, singing, dancing, and having prasadam. So this is how it is evolved, and this is why it happened. So so I'll stop here, and if anyone would like to add to that or discuss any more points, that would be wonderful.
I have a few questions. One is, did Lord Buddha appear 600 years before Christ, not 600 years after?
Who? Lord?
Lord Buddha.
Lord Buddha, did he come after Christ or before Christ?
Wasn't it 600 years before?
I don't know. Sorry.
Thanks.
I don't know that. Haven't looked. Does anybody else know?
500 years before.
Oh, right. Okay.
And so one of the questions I had was, don't the Mayavadis, you were saying that they have some understanding of the absolute truth, but isn't it that they don't believe in any absolute truth? They just believe that, there's no God, God is dead, we are all God ourselves. Whereas the Brahmavadis, they have a conception of the absolute truth, that God is impersonal, whereas the Mayavadis don't have any acceptance of an absolute truth.
Even amongst the Mayavadis, there are different groups. So, like there are two different groups being described in one of these earlier verses, and so there are slight differences in philosophy even amongst the Mayavadis. Like one, I think Carisya or something like that. They have one school of thought, and there is another group of Mayavadis. They have a different school of, slightly different, not much different, but very slight differences in their philosophy. But overall, it's basically that they say yes, that the only manifestation of the absolute truth is materialism, that what they can understand and perceive with their senses. So they don't believe in anything else superior to that. They do accept, though, this is coming from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, they do accept that there is something there that is absolute, but it doesn't have a form, and it doesn't have any spiritual joy or variety. It's not a person. So they do believe in something absolute, but do accept that there is something absolute, but that it doesn't have a form. And as we know, their goal is to merge in the impersonal Brahman. Yeah.
And the other two questions, one was that Lord Shiva Sankaracharya came and taught the Samiraka Bhashya, but wasn't this Mayavadi personal philosophy, very prominent in the Vedic literatures anyway, no way before that?
What do you think, Maharaj? I don't think so. I mean, from what my understanding is, the Vedas, the Upanishads, all of them are, no, I got the answer. Yeah. So this purport and also a few purports prior to this, they're saying that of all the Vedic scriptures, the only conclusion is that it should lead to Krishna consciousness. So we know that there are different books, different strokes for different folks. Like there are different books at different levels, and they're gradually meant to be elevating one to the platform of direct Vaishnava philosophy. But they are meant for us not to get muddled up in, whereas, according to the level of intelligence and guidance from a spiritual master, one may become muddled up and just accept something to be the all in all, but ultimately all the Vedas, all the Upanishads, everything is meant to just lead us progressively in gradual steps, and it may take lifetimes to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But your question was more that wasn't the impersonalism already prevalent in those scriptures? My understanding is that it wasn't, but also that these scriptures are there that they're very confusing and they can muddle people up. And therefore they need to be interpreted under a bona fide guru, but also that they can very easily mislead people if it is not, looked at from the perception of this is leading me here. But Maharaj, would you have anything to add? KK Prabhu, anything to add to that?
The Vedas are a very vast body of work. So in the Kamakanda section is mainly worship of the devas and the fulfillment of desires by worship of the Vedas. Then the Upashamakanda. Then there's mention of course, of Brahman and Paramatma, and then ultimately Bhagavan. So he is correct in one sense that there is mention of these things in the Vedas in large sections. In the Upashamakanda describe Brahman like that. So there were those who focused on those areas and considered them to be the topmost. But when we come to the interpretations of Sankaracharya, we very much emphasize that over and above all other things, actually there's all, whereas you stated that these are, actually if you follow it all through, it's a gradual development, whereas Sankaracharya, of course Buddha came to try to reject the Vedas because they were killing in the name of doing the sacrifices unnecessarily. Then Sankaracharya tried to bring people back, but to bring them back, he established this, that over and above everything else is illusory, whereas the Vedas themselves are not like that, but he established that principle, Sankaracharya, that all illusory, the goal, as Buddha did also, and Sankaracharya did also, the goal is the supreme without attributes, without qualities, and we are all that. So it's a very complicated subject matter, and you're correct in one sense that it's there in the Vedas, in certain sections of it, but these acharyas, Sankaracharya, put another kind of emphasis on it above the others.
Thank you for that, Maharaj. I mean, while the mic is being passed about, I'll also say something, which is that, it is said that even at like right now there is resistance, and there's always an opposing element to Harinam, literally, figuratively, and also that at the time of Lord Chaitanya, these factors were still there, like they have been there throughout. So it's not that the opposing elements were always there, like the different schools of philosophy. And another thing that, thank you for highlighting that, Maharaj, which is important, very important, is that in the name of Buddhism there was a lot of killing and meat eating. and then when Shankaracharya came, then he said, no karma, don't do anything, like don't kill, because it's So he was successful in stopping all the killings, and then by saying that no karma, don't do any sort of activities, that it's all bogus. You have one more thing?
Last question was...
How can you remember all these questions without writing them down?
You must come with a list.
Prabhupada says that the Mayavadis back in Lord Chaitanya's time, in those days, they were very strict, following all regular principles. So they had a lot of potency as well. But most of the Mayavadis these days, they don't follow the four regular principles. So does that mean basically, they don't have any potency? No potency there because they're not even following any regular principles, basically.
Yep, I would say so. I mean, even just from as we know, any austerity gives us merit, and different kinds of sacrifices were done to gain merit. So if they're not really following any system of austerity, and if they're not engaged in any bona fide process, then there wouldn't be much potency. But there's always going to be troublemakers, even without, just take the example of somebody with, somebody who has, say for example, no standing, no job, no material assets, no education, like nothing, but they're alive, and if they've got a mental problem, they can cause a lot of trouble. They can cause the most trouble. And Kali Yuga is like that there can be trouble from all quarters. But if one is following a spiritual path, then potency is gained by sticking to the rules and regulations, and by doing the prescribed duties, and the foremost of which is hearing and chanting. We have to remember that over and above everything else, we have promised to chant 16 rounds minimum every day, and that really should take priority and precedence. So, I think that's pretty straightforward, right? Prabhu, would you have anything to add to that? Okay. Anyone else want to say anything? Okay. Thank you very much for your presence here today. Jai Srila Prabhupada.